Happy Thursday, friends. Welcome back to this edition of the Mystery Wine Blind Tasting with me, Neal Wavra, your host. I'm very excited to spend some time again this Thursday evening with you. Ooh, that's a pretty one. That's very pretty. Who's joining us this evening? I'd love to see a number of friends. I got a chance, of course, to see Jan this afternoon. Jan Nelson popped in to pick up a wine, which is great. Thank you for doing that, Jan. It was nice to see you, however brief, as I was at the stove making a little staff meal. So tonight we're going to get a chance to dig into this little red. Right here, as we're in this wonderful twilight season. It's the ending point of summertime. Now officially gone. I made the last tomato sauce I think that we'll make here at the Field and Main. The last tomatoes came in from Sunnyside Farm yesterday, and or I should say this morning, and then you can tell they're just they're at their apex. They're past it actually, and so they're all going into sauce, and we'll see what comes about next. But for those of you that are here, chime in, let me know you are, and we'll get started. Lorna and Craig, thank you for joining us. Hello, hello. How are you? Doesn't it have an alluring kind of reddish fruit nose? Wow, that's special. Kevin, Candy, and Kathy, hello, hello to all of you. So nice to see so many familiar faces, or familiar names, I should say, coming back through. So perhaps it was my connection to, again, Facebook has changed the format here, and it looks like it's making things a little bit slower in general, as it was last week. So we'll make do. There's really no making do when you have a nice bottle of wine and it's in your glass. So, all right, for those of you that are with us, let's begin working this particular wine. What do you see? It's red, obviously. What kind of red is it? Is it a purple? Is it a ruby? Is it a sort of tawny color? Is it got a brownish profile to it? Where are we at? Oh, Sharon, hello. Good evening to you. And Susan, greetings. Oh no, Jan, the cork came apart when uncorking. You can push it into the bottle with your corkscrew, and if you have a coffee filter, for example, you can decant it that way. Or if you have a little strainer, you can use that, a tea strainer, something like that. I use those all the time when the cork comes apart. But if you can't get the cork out, that's one of the tricks I've used in the past, is to push it all the way in, and that'll allow the wine to come out. There might be a few flakes of cork, and you can skim that cork off by decanting it through a little bit of, if you have cheesecloth, you can do that. If you have a coffee filter, you can do that. It comes out slow, but it will work. So that is something that will help you get past the cork. Worst comes to worst, you don't have any of that stuff, just filter it through your teeth, I guess. Just pick out that cork and keep on going. There's nothing that will keep us from a good glass of wine. So Jan, you're here this evening. Jan Burst and Bobby, hello. Susan, you see something ruby. That's the wine that's in front of us. I agree. Rob and Jill are first timers from Alexandria. Great. Hello. How are you guys? I'm so glad you have the wine and are joining us tonight. So Rob and Jill will tell you a little bit about how this generally works, but there is a process by which we go through these wines, and the process takes us through a deductive process. So we're going to take the wine apart into pieces. We're going to look at it visually. We're going to think about it from an aroma standpoint, so how the wine smells, and then we're going to move into a taste. And each of those evaluations will help to build a profile of what we think this wine might be. And we'll be talking about different elements, and so I'll make sure we kind of cover some of the basics and the basis upon which that we're building all of our assumptions. And so you'll hear some great comments from the people who are on this chat and who are here week to week, like the Millettes, Nicole and Stephen, who I got a chance to see Stephen this weekend, which was awesome. Sarah and Rich and Tara from Alexandria too. Newbies, that's great. We've got some newbies in the house. That's very good. Let's welcome them and get going. Yes, Candy's keeping us on target with a very dense profile. It has a pretty good density in the core, in the middle, right? So when we're looking at the wine, first and foremost, we're determining color. And this color has a reddish cast to it, a more ruby cast as opposed to a purple cast. So there's kind of purple, ruby, and then sort of a browner profile. And there's variations within each of those, and you can get more specific as you wish and as it helps you. But what that tells you right off the bat is that it's not something that would be more purplish, like, say, Petit Verdot, or maybe Tannat, or an Amarone, something like that. A wine that has thicker skins, that is really powerfully tannic, and that imparts a profile of color that's more purplish. So this is more allowing you to then deduce or to remove certain things right off the bat. So we're not necessarily trying to rush to a judgment like, this looks like Pinot Noir, I'm guessing Pinot Noir. We're looking to try to narrow the field down to get as close as we can to a varietal, in the process of working our way through the visual parts. So a reddish wine, a ruby wine that has a density to it, it's clear, as Lauren is pointing out. I agree, you can see through it. It's not cloudy or hazy. It has lots of legs, and so for those of you that are just joining, when we talk about legs or tiers, it's the formation, as you swirl this wine, you can see it here in my glass, of the rim that forms as you swirl, the top part of where the wine goes in the glass, and then what comes down. Those are called tiers or legs. And how they form and how slowly they move is an indication of ripeness, of warmth. And to back up, let's go into that detail for a second. So ripeness and what you might get in the way of alcohol is a derivative of the sugar content of the grapes, right? So if there's enough sugar in the grapes for it to be fermented into alcohol, the more sugar, the more potential alcohol, or you leave a little bit of residual sugar, and as a result, this gives you a greater viscosity in the legs and the tiers that are forming around the glass. And if there's a greater viscosity, they move a little bit slower. And so that's an indication that you might be finding a wine that is from a warmer place, a warmer climate, or a wine that has higher alcohol. And so this is the wine that's showing it has some for sure. So that density of color, that ruby density of color, that intensity of that color, and that you can't really see through the middle. I can see a little bit through the middle. So it's not super deep intensity, but it is pretty deep. And it has a variation toward the rim. And so we're looking at the visual of the rim, which is another indication potentially of age. So if there's a color variation from the rim to the core, it might be a little bit more aged. If there's a watery color variation, so if the rim, the meniscus, is watery, it might be higher in alcohol. And so this wine seems to indicate there's a little bit of that, as Jan pointed out. It has lots of legs, a clean smell, and a clear rim. It is, per Candy's note, smoky, with cooked apples and cherry on the nose, which is, I think, very good. That's a perfect way of kind of starting the discussion. So, on the aroma, nothing faulted in the aroma at this point, and that's great. And so, what we're getting, Jill, yes, lighting absolutely helps. It is hard to do this when you're in a darker spot. So, a bright light, and if you have a white surface, even just a piece of paper underneath the wine, it helps you to illuminate it, which I don't presently have either. So I'm going to pick up on more brownish tones because the table I'm sitting at is that. Jan, nice note. Jan throwing out red Twizzlers. So when we start to begin to smell the wine, we're looking for a few things: fruit, earth, wood. The acronym FEW. Fruit, earth, wood. And we're definitely picking up a lot of wood notes and some earthy notes. But the fruit notes are coming through for Jan Burse in the way of a confectionery element, a red Twizzler. We've got the smoky element, which is probably an indication of the oak aging. We'll get to that more in a moment. Blackberry, black cherry, cranberry, chocolate, wood cedar. Susan always comes up with great descriptors. Smoke and vanilla. So there's a smokiness to this particular wine. And Craig's saying he thinks, I don't know if it's Lorna or Craig, but saying that he thinks it's got a high alcohol profile. Are you smelling that? There's a little bit of that alcoholic element on the nose, isn't there? There's a medicinal element. There's a cough syrupy kind of quality to some of the fruit. And there are these alcoholic esters. And so esters are the alcoholic compounds that carry aroma. And as you swirl, they release and provide the aromas that you're smelling. Yeah. As you deeply inhale, there's a slight burn in the nasal passage that comes from that higher alcohol. We think, And we'll see as we taste it too, there will be another indication, but we're already building a profile. So a potentially warmer climate with a deeper, richer profile, red ruby color with smokiness, and the red fruits, maybe even a little bit of a darker red fruit into black cherry, blackberry kind of profile. The smokiness can come from forest fires and that actually taint the fruit itself. It can come from the toast that you find on an oak barrel. So as a barrel is prepared and made, the staves, the outside slats, are fashioned into the barrel shape with a ring around the outside and no caps. And when the caps are not on, they actually have a little fire in the factory, the warehouse, and they put the barrel over the top of it, and it vents out the top of the open portion of the barrel. But the inside oak starts to char, and you have a light toast, a medium toast, a heavy toast, and the toasting, that transformation of that oak caramelizes the sugars that are in the oak, and you actually get flavor profiles, much like taking raw sugar or confection sugar, table sugar, and then caramelizing it, moving it into caramel. You get a whole series of different flavor profiles as a result. So this is a wine that might indicate, because of that earthiness and that woodsy quality, that musky element that Candy's noting, that Susan's noting, that we're probably in the old world, and you see some of these characteristics more typically in the old world, not exclusively so, but so we're building this profile. We have a potentially higher alcohol, warmer climate, red wine that has a ruby character, not the thickest skin, but thicker skin, more moderate plus alcohol, we think. So we have this idea. So now as we move to taste the wine, can we confirm what we've just seen and smelled? And if so, what does that tell us? And if we can't, and there's something else that emerges, that'll help us get closer and closer to kind of narrowing that window down to a varietal and a place and a vintage, hopefully. So let's try it. Jan, I like your note there, and both Jans, yeah, black cherry and caramel, yes. The Luden's cherry cough drop is kind of like the red Twizzler of the cough drop world. It's the tastiest candy-like cough drop. Those are delicious. Always have one or two or three more than you need of Luden's. And so, but it's a great way to talk about the fruit here. It's has an herbal element to it, so it's medicinal. It's also candied. It has a sweetened element to it. And so let's talk about the profile of this wine from the palate perspective, not from the aroma or flavor perspective. What does this wine have in the way of tannin? What does it have in the way of acidity? What kind of body does it have? And by that, especially for those of you that are joining us, we oftentimes refer to body in a milk context. So is it skim milk? Is it 2% milk, or is it whole milk? And that body weight, that texture, skim milk is thin and sheeting. 2% milk has a little bit more volume and fills the mouth a bit more, and whole milk is richer and rounder. Where does this wine sit in that profile? And that is in part thanks to the alcohol, in part potentially the oak aging, in part perhaps residual sugar, if there is residual sugar, and so that all comes to bear on the profile. Cooked cranberries from Candy, that's good. Yeah, it's another. So we're in that red fruit kind of cooked, herbal, medicinal, slightly sweet confectionery element, and that's neat. So Lorna's respond to my point, it's dry. And dryness on the wine, so we might say we're smelling red Twizzlers and tasting even some kind of cranberries that have been stewed, but it doesn't mean that the wine is sweet. It can have that flavor profile without having the requisite sugar profile that would come with it. And so dryness is perceived mostly on the finish of the wine. Are you perceiving any real sweetness? Like if you have honey, you know it's sweet and it lingers sweet on the back end of your palate. We can have a perception of sweetness thanks to high alcohol and fruit flavors that kind of trick you into thinking you might be dealing with something that is sweeter than it actually is. But this is dry, so yes, a number of you have noted that. Medium tannins. Medium plus acid. It makes you salivate. It makes you pucker a little bit. Medium minus tannin. Susan's saying there's some tannin here. It's medium-ish for me. It's got this 2% milk, kind of medium body quality. It finishes medium, and by finish, how long does it linger on your palate? And try to separate the acidic finish and the actual flavor finish. So the acidity helps to kind of make this wine persist. It's sort of a medium finish. It's not short, so it's not gone within 5 or so seconds, maybe 10 seconds. It's between 10 and 20 seconds in terms of how it lingers, and it definitely doesn't linger longer than, say, 20, which is maybe where you would say it's a long finish. We've had wines that carried on and on and on, and this isn't one of those wines. It's somewhere in the middle. It's definitely not sweet. And per your note earlier, Jan, I think you made it, it's just not as much fruit on the palate as there is on the nose. Susan, you're thinking Pinot Noir? I think that's a good guess. So at this point, it's entirely appropriate to begin to put out varietals it might be, without having to say, like, what one is it? Just, it's got a medium body, lower, moderate kind of tannin. It has a reddish fruit profile. It has an earthiness, a smokiness to it. So Pinot's a valid option here, especially because you can kind of see a little bit more through it. So French Pinot. And Jan's saying French Pinot. Susan's saying not Burgundy, so not French Pinot, unless it's a Pinot Noir coming from somewhere else. Maybe we should talk about Gamay, which would be a lighter kind of profile. Cab blend, it would be a lighter cab, and it has a lacking profile of structure. And I'm not getting any kind of that green element. It's more about that smokiness. Some of that smokiness, if we also got picked up a little bit of meatiness, I think this might be something sort of Syrah oriented. Maybe we consider a lighter Syrah. Very light Grenache. That comes more from a sandy soil, so maybe we would talk about something in that vein. Candy, you're picking up some Malbec. I think Malbec might have a little bit more power, might have more power than this. I have tried a few Malbecs that are a little bit on the lighter side of things, but it's not giving us the kind of depth of fruit profile that you might get, that riper blackberry kind of riper profile. This has got that more sweet medicinal element, and so not quite as much Malbec, I don't think. And certainly we've had Malbecs that are more tannic and broader and more structured. Jan, you think it's too dark for Malbec, huh? I don't know. It definitely is a little more structured than Malbec. So how about something like Nebbiolo, Sangiovese? So something Italian in that. There is a quality of tannin that maybe takes me away from Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir can have that tannin, though. It certainly can be structured, but it is almost drying. So tannin comes from the grape skins, comes from oak too, and the way a wine can be aged in oak. Oak has a tannin profile that is imparted. It's usually not as pronounced as what you'll find from the skins, depending on the varietal. You could also get it from the seeds and stems of the grapes if they're used in the process. So if you're doing a whole cluster fermentation, you might get a little tannin from that. If you're pressing seeds and skins, you're going to get some tannin extraction from that too. And tannin you perceive kind of right along your gums. It's that drying sensation. It's almost like the quality of having cotton balls stuck up kind of around your palate. Lorna, I like the idea of Gamay here too. Gamay coming from, say, Beaujolais. And so you have Beaujolais Nouveau, which a lot of people know is very light and easygoing, and they press, they harvest and press in September, October, and it's out by Thanksgiving. And so it's a really quick, fresh version of Beaujolais, which is really not indicative of Beaujolais itself. It's its own kind of category, using carbonic maceration where the actual fermentation almost begins inside the berries themselves. The juice bursts out and comes in contact with the yeast on the skins and just ventures out to create a fermentation. What we're talking probably about here is more a Beaujolais or Beaujolais Village or Beaujolais Cru, which can occur different classifications within Beaujolais. And so we should consider Gamay. Valpolicella coming from Susan. So a Corvina blend. Corvina, Molinara, and Rondinella are the three varietals that you might find in a typical production of Valpolicella. And that's a wine that has a general lighter profile, a great burger and pizza wine, as was pointed out, that this wine goes really well with burgers. So Pinotage, Jan, is a nice idea. It's a good thought, especially with that smokiness, right? And that smokiness, oftentimes more like a burnt rubber or rubber profile, comes out a lot in Pinotage. And Pinotage is a hybrid grape of sorts. It's a cross of Pinot Noir and Cinsault. And Cinsault would give you some of that tannin profile that we're talking about here. And Robert's got, his first impression was it smelled like Beaujolais. Kevin's loving the obscure Italian idea, and that is its own category in our tastings for sure. When we get to a certain point, it's like, I think this might be Italian, and almost that always suffices to say it's Italian that we don't know, and so therefore it's obscure Italian. And I think Beaujolais is a good call. I don't know that I'm comfortable with, say, with like Grenache, although a number of the descriptors we gave could work for a very light Grenache. For those of you that are more well-lit and reflective background, is there anything, when you're looking at the wine on the side like this, looking through it, is it casting any orange glare? So sometimes that's a tell for Sangiovese, and I'm not thinking this is Sangiovese necessarily. This has a little taper, like, and by that I mean the first part of the experience is a little bit more full, is more on the far side of the 2% milk spectrum, heading toward whole, but not whole milk. And then it finishes more on the skim milk side of the spectrum. And so it's got this leanness to the finish where what lingers is less about the aroma and the flavor and more about the acid and a little bit of the tannin. And the wine itself is it's a little bit simpler in that regard. It has some interesting notes in the nose, not as many on the palate. And it kind of has this leanness that finishes that way. Which can be an indication of a thinner skinned grape, can be an indication of grapes grown on a valley floor as opposed to on a steep hillside. That hillside usually concentrates the amount of fruit that can grow as the vine struggles more on a hillside than it does in a more ample, fertile soil. You can have difficult soils on a more plain area too, but watersheds, vines go deeper, they pull up and extract more character generally from a hillside, and they put more energy into producing less fruit because that's all they can do. And so you get a greater concentration typically, and that's not necessarily coming out in this wine. So let's recap. We've got ruby red. We had some legs, so it has a little bit of alcohol. Is it drinking alcoholic? We smelled it on the nose, and it looked that way in appearance, but are you feeling any burn? Is there any retronasal kind of warmth that's coming up in the way of your taste? For those of you that are just joining us too, we're at the special point, which is between minute 20 and minute 25. Generally speaking, like a lot of times at minute 21 and 22, that the wine will change. If you've just opened it with us at that point of beginning at 7 o'clock, it takes 20 minutes or so, and most wines seem to shift and change. And a lot of folks in the chat will have already opened it and have experienced that change. And this wine just made that change for me. There was that whiff or that hidden element of that cocoa quality that was hiding in the background, and it just popped out in the form of kind of cocoa powder, a bitter cocoa profile. But there is still the tartness. And early harvest would be one explanation for potential tartness, as Susan's pointing out. Yes, you could get tartness by way of a lack of ripeness. It could be more about the varietal itself. You could be in a cool vintage. It could be in a cool place. It could be at a higher elevation in a warm place and getting cooler nights. All those things contribute. Coolness generally contributes to tartness. And if you think about a grape and eating a table grape, one that's more ripe is going to be sweeter, and one that is less ripe is going to still have more acidity to it and tartness. So generally there's an inverse relationship between the acidity in a grape and the amount of ripeness it's achieved. There's a few grape varietals that we know and talk about that have a really unique relationship with acidity as they ripen. Petit Manseng, Riesling, for example, Chenin Blanc, mostly on the white side of things, where as they ripen, as the grapes gain more sugar, they also maintain a high level of acidity. And so this is showcasing a pretty consistent level, higher level of acidity. That tannin element has sort of dropped. Not awful completely, but it's definitely not as pronounced. Yeah. So, coming back to the initial impressions, we have not the same level of alcohol that I think many of us perceived from the beginning. The legs form, but then they went down relatively fast. Well, a few of them are taking their time. So this is probably every bit of 13.5% alcohol, I would think, I would assume. I don't know that it's 14 or more, but it has that retronasal kind of burn on the aroma, but not so much on the palate. I'm not getting a heavy weight. It is all kind of front-loaded with fruit and the tannin, and then it just phased out and eased open. So for those of you that have had it open for an hour or more, is it softened? Oh, it continues to, now kind of a cola note. I really enjoy gummy Coke bottles, and I got a note of that, like this, well, Coke is artificial anyway, but this cola quality, and like almost more like RC Cola than Coca-Cola. All right, so most of us were in the old world. A few people were throwing out things like Malbec, which can be absolutely in the old world. Jan's coming back to Chilean Malbec. I think if it was Chilean Malbec, I would get a little bit more body, more fullness, more venturing toward the whole milk end of the spectrum rather than kind of flirting between skim and 2. I would solidly put this in a 2% camp, but it has elements, it has part of the experience that provide a little bit of leanness. Chris and Courtney just joining us. Hello, how are you guys? You don't have the wine, but it sounds like Barbera. Yeah, and Barbera was thrown out earlier by Susan. And that's not a bad guess at all, because there's an earthen element here that either is perhaps kind of Beaujolais or ventures more into a Barbera kind of camp. So this is a definite opportunity for that. It's got tannin, but it's soft, generally speaking. So I'm comfortable saying that, from an initial standpoint, initial conclusion, we're in the old world. I think we're in France or Italy. I don't think this is Spanish. We don't think it's Bordeaux, for example. If it was Mataran and Malbec, probably not. Cahors and Malbec, excuse me. Mataran and Tannat, not so much. No, so not there. Maybe venturing into Provence. It's not really a Cabernet kind of blend. It has a lot of aroma, cool aroma in terms of black and red fruit. It has cocoa elements. It has confectionery notes. It has a little bit of medicinal note. It has a smokiness to it. It has a profile that keeps changing. There's a fresh, Havarti kind of cheesy quality right now, a lactic element. Lorna, you're coming out strong with a 13% alcohol. 2019 Gamay, Beaujolais, French, which I like. I think that's a strong call. I think that's where I'm headed to. Although much like was it last week that we had Trebbiano, and I couldn't get there, and more and more folks were saying like, let's just consider something Italian, and I was like, nah, I don't think so. For those of you that are just joining us, don't always track with me. It doesn't help. I'm here more to guide you, and hopefully you can form your own opinions, because when I have an opinion, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to get it right. Candy is reporting for Kevin that he's firmly in the old world, planting a flag in Italy with the obscure Italian varietal guess, which works, and a relatively new vintage. So new vintage, right? We were looking at it from the appearance standpoint early on. Was there a great change between the rim and the center of the wine? Not so much. There was a little wateriness, which would indicate more of a higher alcohol element. And as you taste the wine, it doesn't taste old. It doesn't have sort of a secondary series of characteristics where that fruit is gone. But boy, it could. There's a mintiness now, a menthol element coming out. Could be coming out. So Susan's at Barbera 2019. So I would say all that to say that's a little bit more toward a younger vintage, and you have to think a couple of years out being brand new. So 2020, 2020 in the marketplace, yes, but 2019 more so, 2018. So 2 to 4 years of age is young. And if you get 5, 6, 7, 8, you're in a moderate range, and then anything past that is definitely older. And for the most part, we're not getting the opportunity to try older vintages. So from a Chris Shirley camp of playing the bottle and playing the price point, you can learn a lot about a wine that way too. And so this is likely not an older wine. Is it Amarone, coming from Sarah? Amarone would be a lot richer, a lot darker, and more raisiny by way of the process, but this could be the other end of the spectrum from Amarone, the Valpolicella. So same region, same grapes, but just a different treatment. So Valpolicella would have been picked earlier, fresher, maybe not from as concentrated a place. And then as the grapes hang and get to the end of the season, as far into the season as possible, they're cut and they're dried and they become little raisins, and then they're pressed. And that pressed juice is like, press a raisin. What do you get when you press a raisin? Nectar, and not a lot of it. And the potential to make a wine from that then is very limited, and you get this more concentrated profile. And so that would be Amarone, but maybe in that same spot. So Valpolicella, Barbera, Gamay, kind of where we're all playing. And I think Jan's circling back to the old world. This has a lot of that. It has a cocoa coffee thing and cocoa nib that's coming out now. It's taken me away from Gamay. And tannins there. I like the Barbera. I like the Valpolicella call. And I'm at a little bit of a loss. This is where you get, right? So what's cool about this process is that even if you were to say, I have 3 guesses right now. I have Gamay from Beaujolais. I have a Valpolicella Corvina blend from northeastern Italy, and I have Barbera coming from the northwestern part of Italy in the Piedmont. You already weeded out a whole bunch of wine. You knew a ton of things about this wine that you didn't know prior to jumping into it. And by evaluating it in this way, you learn a lot more about wine, which from our perspective is all about increasing your appreciation. The more you know, the more you appreciate. The more you appreciate, the better time you have. So I think Pinotage is also a fair guess. It has this earthiness to it, Jan, that some Pinotage can have. So adding a 4th there, Pinotage is an option. I think there would be more fruit on the palate, but there's different styles and different profile and different vintage there. So I'm going to go with Barbera. Am I? Yeah, I'll go Barbera, 2018, so it has a little bit of age, but not a ton, with a certain caveat that I'm not positive about that. I don't feel like I nailed that, but I feel like we got really close, and that's pretty awesome. Sarah Ripasso is the same process. So if Valpolicella is here, Ripasso is here, and Amarone is here in terms of progression. So that raisinated fruit that is used to make that Amarone is put on Valpolicella is put on that. So it's passed over that spent raisiny material, which adds a level of complexity and depth and character and more fruit to the Valpolicella, but not quite as complex and dense as the Amarone. And so this one I don't think presents quite that volume either. So Valpolicella would be where I would take this if I was in that part of the world. And per Chris's note, I'll own it. I'm going to stay with I'll make a change. So I would have gone from Gamay and Beaujolais to Barbera. I'm gonna go. I'll venture over to Valpolicella. So let's do that. Stay in Italy. Valpolicella 2019. Just a basic Valpolicella, not necessarily Superiore, but maybe that Superiore. Superiore, when you see that on the label, means there's 1 degree more of alcohol. There's a little bit more ripeness to it, and that might indicate some of the black fruit that we're getting here and that higher degree. So potentially Superiore 2019 Valpolicella. Let's see, folks. Oh, shoot. I talked myself out of it. This is from Morgon. Morgon is a cru Beaujolais. So this is Gamay. Guys, we were on it. Many of you still on it. That's awesome. And I walked away from it. I should have owned it. I should have gone with my first gut impression. But yeah, this is Jean-Pierre Lage and Morgon. Morgon is one of the 10 cru villages. So there's places within Beaujolais that are designated and recognized as having a greater concentration and a particular or unique profile to the wine. And Morgon here is one of those sites. And man, shoot. It's fun though, super fun. And that's where, so for those who had tasted Beaujolais, just classic straight Beaujolais, not Nouveau, but just classic, has a lightness to it. This had that tannin profile up front that really was one of the things I was considering as I was venturing away from Beaujolais. And it's more explained by Morgon. It's explained by a cru site. It's explained by something with more concentration. As I described it, being a little simpler is probably not fair to the wine. I think I said that, hopefully I said that before minute 22 or whatever it was that when this wine changed, because it did gain a little complexity. And that complexity and that texture is what took me away from Beaujolais. But this is a great reminder that the Beaujolais cru can bring you into a profile that's a little bit richer. So yeah, Lorna, you nailed it. That's awesome. And Robert, you got it too. That's really great, guys. That's really, really cool. It feels wonderful, doesn't it? When you do nail it, it's pretty special. And either way, if you don't, you get to try a wine and evaluate it. And as I said, learn to appreciate it that much more and find a way to develop your palate. This is a workout. We are working out your palate and creating linkages, creating synapses that your brain is filing away, hopefully, and creating a Rolodex of, when I smell this, this is what it takes me to. And you train it enough over time, and then that gut kind of sense that, this smells like Beaujolais to me, is appropriate. It's always something to be wary of in the blind context in terms of rushing to a judgment, but it's certainly something that over time, the more you taste, the better you get at it. The more push-ups you do, the more you can do, if you're doing them right. So we're doing the heavy lifting, the major work of blind tasting, and that results in people getting a call. It's really great. So it's just getting more interesting. I think it needed some time. 2019 too, so it's relatively young. I mean, it's very young. It can go for a period more. This wine would be a lot of fun. Think about our descriptors of cranberry and cherry and dark fruit and some of that medicinal element, but that cranberry note in particular and the profile of this and that higher acid. Think about a dollop of cranberry sauce on a portion of turkey thigh at Thanksgiving. This would be a beautiful wine for that. And so we're just putting the final touches on actually a buying event for those of you that enjoyed tasting wine like this and want to taste a series of wines. We'll have our annual or semi-annual fall buying event that's coming up at the end of October. Yes, end of October. That will afford you the opportunity to come for about an hour or so and taste through 20 wines at 4 or 5 different tables. One of those tables is thematically for the Thanksgiving table, and then we'll have a table dedicated to gatherings and gifts, a table dedicated to sparkling wines, a table dedicated to the weird and wonderful in the world. A lot of wines that we find in the process of working for this program, figuring out what wines we can stump us all with. We'll end up on some of those wines that will end up in the table there. And so it'll be a fun program. You can visit our website and look for the wine buying event and purchase a ticket that way if you wish, and come and join us. It's on Saturday afternoon, and just a fun way to spend an afternoon. And you get discounts. So we sell at these 2 events, one in the spring, one in the fall. We sell wines at the lowest price we've ever sold them before, and they're at a retail markup, and you get a discount if you buy a case. And so, Chris, I believe the sign-up's going out shortly. If it isn't already, I will touch base on that next week for sure, but you can visit the website, and we should be up this week as we're finalizing the program now. So, cheers, everybody. Until next week, enjoy this one. This one, give it some time. Let it sit for a minute. Have it with that burger, have it with pizza, have it with pretty much anything at this point. It's a great first part of fall wine to have around. Put a little spice on things. Or you can just sit and enjoy it as the temperature drops and the night goes cool. Cheers. To the new guys, new folks joining, thank you for joining us. For those that returned, I really appreciate it. And I will see you on Thursday next. Until then, have a great week, everybody.